the elevator descended, Howie was lost in thought, having just abruptly learned the shocking news that Danny was dead, and had been for several years. Abner supposed that Howie must have been experiencing emotions similar to those he had felt several years prior. After all, both men had been missing in their world of gambling at the time of Danny's death. They stepped into the bustling lobby, where the morning rush of guests mixed with the clinking of plates from the adjacent breakfast area. Almost immediately, the room service waiter from earlier spotted them and approached. "You look a sight better than you did earlier," the waiter exclaimed, looking at Howie. "Decided to use the guest elevators this time?" This interaction must have cheered Howie up, as he beamed and gave a little bow. "I'm a new man. My friend Neddie's got the magic touch." Abner nodded, steering Howie towards the coffee shop where Phyllis and the kids were already seated. David was engrossed in a comic book, and Molly was coloring diligently on her placemat. Phyllis looked up and gasped when she saw Howie. "Abner, I don't understand. What's going on? How is Howie here? I thought he was dead?" "Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated," Howie interrupted with a flourish, causing Molly to giggle. Abner gave Phyllis a reassuring look. "We'll explain everything, honey. Let's sit down and have breakfast first." David, who had finally looked up from his comic, stared at Howie in disbelief. "Uncle Howie, we thought you were gone forever." Howie ruffled David's hair. "I just took a little vacation from life, Davy, but here I am, back to keep everybody on their toes." They settled into the booth, Howie's charm slowly dissipating the initial shock. Phyllis, though still bewildered, began to smile as Howie regaled the kids with exaggerated tales of his adventures, omitting the less savory details. As they finished their meal, Abner leaned back and proposed an outing. "How about a picnic today? It's our last day here, and the weather is perfect." The kids cheered, and even Phyllis seemed eager, though she cast a worried glance at Howie. "Are you up for it, Howie?" she asked gently. Howie puffed out his chest. "A picnic? I wouldn't miss it for the world." The picnic spot was a beautiful, sprawling park with large, shady trees and a gentle creek running through it. They spread out a checkered blanket and unpacked the picnic basket filled with sandwiches, fruits, and a variety of snacks. Howie was his usual animated self, but Abner noticed him struggling to keep up during a game of frisbee with the kids. Phyllis sidled up to Abner, her voice low and concerned. "Abner, look at him. He's not well. What's going to happen to him when we leave tomorrow?" Abner watched Howie, who was now sitting on the blanket, catching his breath and laughing with Molly. He felt a pang of guilt and helplessness. "I don't know, Phyllis. I really don't." After lunch, while the kids played by the creek, Howie pulled Abner aside. His usual exuberance was replaced with a rare moment of seriousness. "Neddie, I've been thinking," Howie began, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I might give up gambling. I mean, it's not doing me any favors, and seeing you all, it makes me realize what I've been missing." Abner felt a surge of hope but kept his tone measured. "That's a big step, Howie. You'd need support." Howie nodded, looking out at the creek. "Yeah, I know, I want to try for real." Abner put a hand on Howie's shoulder. "We're flying back home tomorrow morning. Here, take my home number." He scribbled it on a piece of paper and handed it to Howie. "Call me anytime. We'll help you through this." Howie borrowed Abner's pen and scribbled a number on the back of a matchbook from his pocket. "This is the number where I'll be staying." As the sun began to set, they packed up the picnic and headed back to the hotel. At the entrance, Abner took a deep breath and turned to Howie. "I wish we had more time, Howie. There's so much I need to tell you about everything, about my other family." Howie looked puzzled but nodded. "You can tell me next time, Neddie. There'll be a next time, right?" Abner forced a smile. "Yeah, there'll be a next time. Take care of yourself, Howie. Promise me." Howie gave a mock salute. "Promise, Neddie." They shook hands before Howie turned and walked away, his steps slower and more deliberate than usual. Abner watched him until he disappeared into the crowd, a mix of hope and sorrow churning within him. Back in their suite, Phyllis touched his arm gently. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Abner shook his head slowly. "I don't know, Phyllis, I really don't know." As he lay in bed that night, Abner thought about Howie and the complicated web of their friendship. He realized that despite everything, Howie's presence had brought a strange, bittersweet joy into their lives, a reminder of the past they shared and the uncertain future ahead. 2 days after the picnic, Abner and his family were settled back into the routine of their daily lives. The evening had fallen, wrapping the house in a gentle quiet. David and Molly, clad in their pajamas, tiptoed through the hallway, their curiosity piqued by the hushed conversation between their parents in the kitchen. They crouched near the door, straining to catch a snippet of the muted dialogue. All they could make out were soft murmurs, punctuated by the occasional clink of dishes being put away. Frustrated, they exchanged a look and retreated back to their bedrooms, each to their own thoughts and imaginations. In the kitchen, Phyllis leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "Abner, we can't just leave him down there. You saw the state he was in." Abner sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Phyllis, but inviting him to live with us, it's a big step. What if he isn't serious about giving up gambling? What if it affects the kids?" Phyllis picked up the thin book of matches Howie had scribbled his number on. She turned it over in her hands thoughtfully before placing it back on the counter and gently squeezing Abner's hand. "He needs us, Abner. I believe he's serious. He just needs a chance." Abner looked at the matchbook, then at the phone. With a resigned nod, he picked up the receiver and dialed the number. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Motel 6. How can I help?" Abner cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Howie Packer, or he might be under the name Howie Parker, or Harvey Pasteur." The operator paused. "You mean the funny-looking guy?" Abner managed a small smile. "Yes, that's him." "One moment, sir. I think I saw him pass by earlier. He was smoking a cigar. Hang on." The silence stretched on as Abner waited, tapping his fingers on the countertop. After what felt like an eternity, he heard a familiar voice on the other end. "Neddie, is that you?" Abner couldn't help but smile at Howie's unmistakable cheerfulness. "Yes, Howie, it's me. How have you been?" "Oh, just living the high life at the Motel 6. Classy joint this," Howie quipped, laughter in his voice. Phyllis nudged Abner, urging him to get to the point. He took a deep breath. "Howie, I need to know, were you serious about giving up gambling?" The line went silent for a moment. Then Howie's voice came through, quieter but firm. "I was, Neddie. I haven't bet a nickel since that picnic. I'm done with that life." Abner felt a weight lift off his shoulders. "That's good to hear, Howie. Phyllis and well, we want you to come live with us until you can get back on your feet. What do you say?" There was a brief pause, then an outburst of pure, unfiltered joy. "Neddie, you're a real pal. I won't let you or Phyllis down, I swear. This means more to me than you can imagine." Abner smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "All right, Howie. Get the first bus in the morning. I'll be waiting for you at the bus terminal in the evening." Howie's voice was full of excitement. "Will do, Neddie. Thanks again. You won't regret this." Abner hung up the phone and turned to Phyllis, who was watching him with a soft smile. "He's coming," he said simply. Phyllis stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. "You did the right thing, Abner. He needs us." Abner hugged her back, feeling the tension of the past few days start to dissipate. "I hope so, Phyllis. I really do." The following evening, Abner stood at the bus terminal, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the air was thick with heat and the hum of distant traffic. Finally, he spotted Howie, who, true to form, looked even more disheveled than usual. His shirt was wrinkled, and his hair seemed to have lost a battle with the wind. "Hey, Neddie," Howie called out, waving energetically despite his bedraggled appearance. "Hey, Howie," Abner replied, his voice a mixture of relief and concern. He led Howie to the car, and they started the drive back to Abner's house. The road stretched out before them, a ribbon of asphalt in the twilight. So, Neddie, Howie began, his tone suddenly more serious. I've been chewing on something you mentioned in your suite and at the picnic. This other family of yours. You got a second wife or something? Abner chuckled despite himself. No, Howie, it's not like that. My other family is the Fellowship. It's a group of people who are recovering compulsive gamblers. We meet regularly to support each other and stay on track. Howie's eyes widened. A fellowship, huh? Like secret handshakes and all that jazz? Not exactly, Abner said, shaking his head. It's more about sharing experiences and helping each other stay away from gambling. Would you like to join me for a meeting tomorrow night? Howie hesitated, scratching his head. I don't know, Neddie. I mean, I'm not exactly the poster child for serious meetings, but I guess it couldn't hurt. That's the spirit, Abner said, giving Howie a reassuring smile. They arrived at Abner's house just as the last light of day was fading. Phyllis, David, and Molly were waiting on the porch, and they greeted Howie warmly. Phyllis gave him a hug, and the kids swarmed around him, eager to show him around. Wow, this place is swell, Howie said, looking around with wide eyes. You've got quite the setup here, Neddie. Thanks, Howie, Abner said, patting him on the back. Let's get you settled. The tour ended at the guest room, a cozy space with a neatly made bed and a small dresser. Howie dropped his bag on the floor and flopped onto the bed with a dramatic sigh. This'll do just fine, he said, grinning up at Abner. Get some rest, Abner said. See you in the morning. The following evening, Abner and Howie stood outside a modest community center. Howie tugged at his old clothes, looking more nervous than Abner had ever seen him. Don't worry, Howie, Abner said, giving his friend a reassuring nod. Everyone here understands what you're going through. I sure hope so, Neddie, Howie replied, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Let's get this show on the road. They walked into the meeting room where rows of chairs had been arranged. The room was filled with people, but Abner and Howie slipped in quietly, taking seats near the back. The meeting began, and one by one, members of the fellowship shared their stories. Howie listened intently, his usual playful demeanor replaced by a look of deep concentration. Finally, late in the meeting, the chairperson looked over at Howie. Would you like to share? He asked gently. Howie shifted in his seat, looking down at his hands. I don't know much about this recovery stuff, he began, his voice hesitant, but I know I want to stop gambling. It's messed up my life and I want to start fresh. I guess that's why I'm here. There was a moment of silence and then the room filled with supportive murmurs and nods. Abner felt a swell of pride for his friend. Howie might be a bundle of quirks and eccentricities, but he was trying. And that was what mattered. After the meeting, Abner and Howie walked back to the car in silence. Once they were on the road, Howie let out a long breath. Well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be, he said, a hint of his usual humor returning to his voice. You did great, Howie, Abner replied. Thanks for bringing me, Neddie. I think this might actually help. Howie responded, staring out the window at the passing lights. I'm glad you came, Abner said. And remember, you're not alone in this. We're all here to help each other. Howie nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. You know, Neddie, you're a pretty good guy. I'm lucky to have you as a friend. And I'm lucky to have you, Howie, Abner said, smiling. Now let's get home. The rest of the drive was quiet, each man lost in his own thoughts. As they pulled into Abner's driveway, the porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow in the night. Phyllis, David, and Molly were waiting to welcome them back, their smiles a beacon of comfort and support. The next morning, Abner knocked on the door of the guest room. Howie, you up for a little shopping trip? Howie opened the door, looking more awake than Abner expected. Shopping? Sure, Neddie. What are we shopping for? New clothes. You've still got most of that $7,500, right? Let's get you some things that aren't, well, falling apart, Abner said with a grin. Howie chuckled and nodded. Yeah, I've still got most of my strong green men. The shopping center was bustling with activity as Abner and Howie wandered from store to store. Howie's old clothes stood out among the sleek modern attire on display, but he didn't seem to mind. He tried on various outfits, making exaggerated poses in front of the mirrors. eliciting chuckles from the store clerks and fellow shoppers. "Neddie, check this out," Howie called from inside a changing room, stepping out in a sharp-looking suit. "Do I look like $1,000,000 or what?" "You look great, Howie," Abner said, smiling. "A real sharp dresser." Howie's grin widened. "Well, if it isn't the snappiest suit this side of the Mississippi." After a few hours of shopping, they headed to a nearby barber shop. Howie sat down in the barber's chair, chatting animatedly with the barber about everything and nothing. The barber seemed amused by Howie's endless stream of chatter and decided to throw in a complimentary shave. "All cleaned up, Howie," the barber said, holding up a mirror so Howie could see the back of his head. "Thanks a heap, pal," Howie said, admiring his reflection. "These new duds and this haircut set me back a Philadelphia printer, but boy, does it feel good to be spruced up." With bags of new clothes in tow, Abner and Howie finally sat down in a coffee shop to rest. They ordered a couple of coffees and some light snacks, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. "Cheers to a productive day, Neddie," Howie said, raising his coffee cup. "Cheers, Howie," Abner replied, clinking his cup against Howie's. "You look like a new man." They chatted easily for a while, laughing about Howie's antics in the stores and the barber's shop. But as they settled into a comfortable silence, Abner noticed Howie's expression shift. His eyes grew distant and his hands trembled slightly as he sipped his coffee. Suddenly, Howie's shoulders began to shake, and he buried his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Abner's heart clenched in confusion and concern. "Howie, what's wrong?" Abner asked, leaning forward. "I thought you'd be happy after such a good day." "That's just it, Neddie," Howie choked out between sobs. "It's been such a great day. It's made me realize how empty my life has been for so many years." Abner sat back, stunned. He hadn't expected this. "What do you mean, Howie?" Howie wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his voice trembling. "I've been wandering around in a fog for so long, Neddie. Gambling, losing everything, living from one bet to the next. Today I felt alive again, and it hurts. It hurts to realize how much I've missed, how much I've thrown away." "Howie," Abner began, but Howie cut him off. "I don't think I can face recovery, Neddie," Howie said, his voice breaking. "It'll dredge up too many bad feelings from the past. It's easier to bury it all, to keep running. It's too much to face." Abner reached across the table, placing a steadying hand on Howie's arm. "I understand, Howie. I felt the same way. The pain, the regret, it can be overwhelming. But you're not alone. You've got me. You've got the fellowship. We'll face it together." Howie looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "You really think it'll get better, Neddie?" Abner nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know it will, Howie. It takes time, and it's not easy. But it does get better, and you don't have to do it alone." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of Howie's pain hanging heavy in the air. Then Howie took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. "All right, Neddie," he said quietly. "I'll give it a shot, but I'm gonna need all the help I can get." "You'll have it," Abner assured him, "every step of the way." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Abner couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Howie was finally ready to face his demons, and Abner would be there to support him. Early the next day, Abner paused outside Howie's room, the door slightly ajar. He heard Howie muttering to himself and peeked in. Howie was sitting on the bed, counting his cash, referring to the banknotes as his strong green men. "Morning, Neddie," Howie called out without looking up. "Just making sure my army's in good shape." Abner smiled, stepping into the room. "Looks like you've still got lots of men." "Yep," Howie said, grinning. "And you know what, Neddie? I think it's time to give some of these fine soldiers a new mission." "Oh?" Abner raised an eyebrow. "Yep," Howie repeated, gathering a significant portion of the cash. "I'm gonna give these to Phyllis. Help out with the household expenses and all that." Abner nodded appreciatively. "I'm sure she'll appreciate it, Howie. That's very generous of you." They found Phyllis in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the kids. Howie approached her with a playful salute. "Morning, Phyllis," he said, handing her the cash. "A little something to help with the household running costs." Phyllis gasped, her eyes widening. "Howie, this is too much." "Nah," Howie said, shaking his head. "Consider it my way of saying thanks for letting me stay." Phyllis looked at the money, then at Howie. "Well, if you insist, but I'm going to bank part of it in case you need some of it back later." Howie waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about me. I've got plenty more of these little green fellows." After Abner left for work and Phyllis took the kids to school, Howie found himself alone in the house. The silence was oppressive, and he soon began to feel sorry for himself. He went back to his room and started counting his leftover cash. He stood the bills up on his bed like soldiers on parade and began marching them around the perimeter of the bed, singing a military song in a silly voice. Once the novelty wore off, Howie sat by the window, staring out at the quiet suburban scene. He watched the postman doing his rounds, a worker from the telephone company atop a pole installing a new cable, and a woman pushing a pram up and down the same street, trying to get her baby to sleep. Feeling restless and bored, Howie decided to take a walk. Without really knowing why, he took his bundle of cash with him, almost as if on autopilot. He wandered into a familiar neighborhood where he and Abner used to gamble. He told himself he'd just visit the old bar for a drink, a snack, and maybe a cigar, oblivious to the obvious danger of gambling inside. At the bar, Howie settled in with a cigar and a drink, feeling a strange sense of comfort in the familiar surroundings. He let the smoke curl around him, savoring the moment. For a while he was content, but then he overheard a conversation at the bar. "Did you hear? Old Lucky Strike is racing again today." Howie's ears perked up. Lucky Strike was the name of a horse he'd once had a big win on. He glanced over and saw a bookie taking bets from some of the patrons. Just a small bet to cheer myself up a little, he thought, convincing himself it was harmless. He approached the bookie, handed over some cash, and placed his bet on Lucky Strike. Hours passed in a blur of drinks, cigars, and bets. Each win spurred another bet, each loss a desperate attempt to recoup. The cycle continued until Howie found himself staring at his empty wallet. He was flat broke. Around midnight, Howie wandered back to Abner's house, puzzled and ashamed. How had he ended up here again? The weight of his failure pressed heavily on his shoulders as he trudged through the dark streets. When he finally reached the house, Abner was waiting for him. He opened the door, his face a mixture of concern and resignation. "Come on in, Howie," Abner said softly. Howie slumped into a chair in the kitchen, rubbing his face with his hands. "Neddie, I'm sorry. I don't know how it happened. Abner held up a hand to stop him. "It's okay, Howie. I get it. The important thing is you're back now." Howie looked up, his eyes red and tired. "I don't understand, Neddie. Why can't I stop?" Abner sighed, sitting down across from him. "It's not easy, Howie, but we'll get through this. You need to get some sleep now. There's somewhere important I need to take you tomorrow. I should have taken you there sooner." Howie nodded slowly, standing up. "All right, Neddie. Thanks for not giving up on me." "Never," Abner said firmly. "Get some rest. We've got a long day ahead." As Howie headed to his room, Abner watched him go, feeling a mixture of hope and worry. He hoped that tomorrow's trip would be the start of something better for Howie. "Good night, Howie," Abner called after him. "Good night, Neddie," Howie replied, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. The next morning, Abner woke Howie early. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft light through the windows. Howie rubbed his eyes and looked up at Abner with a confused expression. "Morning, Neddie. What's the rush?" "Get dressed, Howie," Abner said, his voice steady but serious. "We're going somewhere important." Howie, sensing the gravity in Abner's tone, nodded and quickly got ready. They drove in silence, the city slowly waking up around them. Howie fidgeted with his hands, glancing over at Abner, who was focused on the road. "Where are we going, Neddie?" Howie finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "We're going to visit Danny," Abner replied softly. Howie's eyes widened and he nodded again, understanding. Danny had been Abner's older brother, but he had also been like an older brother to Howie. The thought of visiting Danny's grave brought a mix of emotions to Howie's heart. They arrived at the cemetery, the morning air crisp and quiet. Abner led the way through the rows of headstones until they reached Danny's grave. The headstone was simple, yet it carried a profound weight for both men. Abner took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Hey, Danny, it's been a while. I'm here with Howie. We really need you right now." He paused, looking down at the grave. "My recovery is going well. The fellowship has been a big help. David and Molly are growing up so fast, and Phyllis, well, she's the rock that holds us all together." Howie stood quietly beside Abner, his hands trembling slightly. "Danny, you wouldn't believe it," Abner continued. "I ran into Howie by chance in a hotel lobby just a few days ago. It felt like a sign. We're here today because Howie needs your strength, Danny. We both do." Abner stepped back, giving Howie the space to speak. Howie took a deep breath, but as soon as he opened his mouth, he started to sob. The words caught in his throat, and he struggled to get anything out. Finally, Howie reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded personal card. He held it up, his hand shaking. "I still have it, Danny. Your card, the one you gave me. I never go anywhere without it." Howie took a moment to compose himself, then began to speak as if Danny were standing right there. "Danny, I've messed up so many times. I don't even know where to start, but I wanted to tell you everything." He talked about his life, sharing stories both trivial and profound. From the small victories to the deep regrets, Howie poured out his heart. Abner watched in awe as Howie spoke with such conviction, as if he truly believed Danny was listening. Howie's words flowed like a conversation, with pauses as if he were waiting for Danny to answer. "Remember that time we all went fishing and I almost fell in? You pulled me back so fast I didn't even know what happened." He laughed through his tears. "I miss you, Danny. I wish you were here to pull me back again." Overcome with emotion, Abner began to softly sob. Howie, noticing this, placed his arm around Abner's shoulders. "Don't worry, Neddie. I reckon we're both going to be all right. I reckon Danny knows that too." Abner nodded, grateful for Howie's words. They stood there for a while longer, the silence between them filled with the unspoken bond they shared with Danny. As they finally turned to leave, Howie looked back at the grave. "We'll be back, Danny. Promise." The drive back was quiet, each man lost in his own thoughts. Howie fiddled with the card Danny had given him, a small, tangible connection to the past. When they arrived home, Abner turned to Howie. "Thank you for coming with me today, Howie. I think it did us both some good." Howie nodded, his usual playful demeanor subdued by the morning's events. "Yeah, Neddie. I think it did. I needed that." They went inside, where Phyllis greeted them with a concerned look. "How was it?" she asked gently. "It was good," Abner said, glancing at Howie. "We needed it." Phyllis nodded, understanding. "By the way, Howie, I have put some of the money you gave me back in your dresser drawer. Abner mentioned you'd be needing it. Breakfast is ready if you're hungry." Howie looked embarrassed, but he was relieved that he wouldn't have to approach Phyllis to ask for some of the money back. As they sat down to eat, Howie became more at ease. The visit to Danny's grave had stirred up a lot of emotions, but it had also given him a sense of connection and purpose. Abner watched his friend closely, hoping that this would be a turning point. Later that day, Howie found Abner in the living room. "Neddie, I've been thinking. I want to try again. The fellowship, I mean." Abner smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "That's great to hear, Howie. We'll go together." Howie nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "Yeah, together. I think Danny would like that." Abner clapped Howie on the shoulder. "I think he would too, Howie. I think he would too." The next morning, Abner found Howie at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper with exaggerated interest. Phyllis had already left to drop the kids at school, leaving the two men alone. "Howie, we need to talk," Abner began, sitting down across from him. "It's important to address the past, make amends where we can." Howie responded anxiously. "I wouldn't know where to start, who to start with." "Why don't we go to see Pete today? You need to make things right with him. It's been 11 days since you first failed to show up for work." Howie's face fell, but he quickly recovered, giving Abner a lopsided grin. "Pete's Pita Burgers. I guess it's time to face the music." They caught a morning flight, the journey filled with Howie's constant chatter. Abner listened with a mixture of amusement and concern. Upon landing, they took a cab to Pete's Pita Burgers. The small, greasy diner looked the same as ever, the smell of frying meat wafting out as they approached. Pete, a burly man with a thick mustache, was behind the counter, flipping patties. "Hey, Pete," Howie called, waving his cap in greeting. Pete looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to a scowl. "Howie Packer, where the hell have you been?" Howie shuffled his feet, looking down. "I owe you an apology, Pete. I missed work, and I gave away too much food. I let you down." Pete crossed his arms, his scowl deepening. "You're damn right you did. 11 nights in a row, no call, no show, and you were practically running a soup kitchen with my supplies." Howie nodded vigorously. I know, I'm really sorry. I was in a bad place, but I'm trying to turn things around. I've moved to another city for a fresh start." Pete's expression softened slightly. "Well, I'd better find a new night manager. I appreciate you coming here to say that." "Thanks, Pete, means a lot," Howie replied, his voice sincere. Abner stepped forward, shaking Pete's hand. "Thanks for understanding, Pete." After their conversation with Pete, they walked a few blocks to the YMCA. Howie owed 5.5 weeks back rent and needed to make amends there as well. The building was bustling with activity, but the manager, an elderly woman, recognized Howie immediately. "Howie Packer, what brings you back here?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I owe you an apology. I skipped out on my rent and I'm here to make it right," Howie said, pulling out his wallet. The manager smiled kindly. "Well, it's good to see you're taking responsibility. Better late than never." After settling his debt, they headed to the pawn shop where Howie had left his watch and 2 suitcases of clothes. The shop was dimly lit, carrying the unmistakable smell of old leather and metal. The pawnbroker, a grizzled man with sharp eyes, handed over Howie's possessions without a word. "Howie, what do you want to do with these?" Abner asked as they left the shop. Howie held up the watch, a cheap piece with a worn leather strap. "I'm keeping this, a reminder of my gambling days." He glanced at the suitcases. "The clothes, let's donate them to the homeless shelter." The shelter was nearby, and the staff gratefully accepted the donation. Howie looked around, seeing faces that mirrored his past struggles. It was a sobering moment, and Abner hoped it would reinforce Howie's commitment to change. On the flight home, Howie was quieter than usual, lost in thought. Abner seized the opportunity to broach a sensitive topic. "You know, Howie, Eleanor should be next on your list. You need to make amends to her." Howie's face darkened and he turned to Abner, eyes flashing. "My ex, Eleanor? No way, Neddie. I don't owe Miss Eleanor a thing. She's the one who should be making amends to me." Abner raised an eyebrow. "Howie, I know she sold all your possessions while you were missing in Caracas. The house, the furniture, the car, your clothes, everything. Maybe she had her reasons." "Her reasons? She cleaned me out, Neddie. I came back to nothing. No house, no clothes, not even a toothbrush." Howie spat, his anger evident. "I will never make amends to Miss Eleanor. She doesn't deserve it." Abner sighed, deciding to let the matter rest for now. Pushing Howie too hard could backfire. "All right, Howie, let's focus on one thing at a time." The rest of the flight passed in silence, Howie brooding and Abner lost in his thoughts. Abner could only hope that Howie would eventually come around to the idea of making amends to Eleanor. For now, it was enough that he was taking steps in the right direction. Back home the next morning, Howie sat across from Abner at the kitchen table, his eyes downcast. He fidgeted with a napkin, twisting it into knots. "Neddie, I need to apologize," Howie began, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Abner looked up from his coffee, surprised by Howie's serious tone. "What's on your mind, Howie?" "I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I'm still angry at Miss Eleanor, but I'm willing to do anything to get better," Howie admitted, his eyes meeting Abner's with a sincerity that was rare for him. Abner nodded slowly. "That's a big step, Howie. If you're ready, we can go see her today. I don't have any pressing work appointments, and I can drive us to Buffalo." Howie blinked, taken aback by Abner's willingness. "You'd do that for me, Neddie?" "Of course, Howie, we're in this together," Abner replied with a reassuring smile. They hit the road shortly after, Howie's nervous energy filling the car. He kept glancing out the window, muttering to himself about what he might say to Eleanor. Abner drove steadily, glancing over occasionally to offer a supportive nod. "You sure this is a good idea, Neddie?" Howie asked for the 5th time, twisting his hands together. "Yes, Howie, it's the right thing to do," Abner said firmly. As they neared Buffalo, Howie's anxiety seemed to peak. He started recounting old memories, most of which involved him and Eleanor during better times. Abner listened patiently, letting Howie's words flow like a nervous stream. When they finally pulled up to Eleanor's house, Howie took a deep breath, staring at the front door. "Here goes nothing," he muttered. They walked up the path together, and Abner rang the doorbell. There was a long pause before the door creaked open, revealing Eleanor. She looked older than Howie remembered, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Howie," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Hi, Eleanor, I came to talk," Howie said, shifting from foot to foot. Eleanor folded her arms across her chest, her expression wary. "If you're here for money, you're out of luck. I don't have any to give or loan you." "No, it's not like that," Howie said quickly. "I came to make amends." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Make amends? After all this time?" Howie nodded, his hands shaking slightly. "Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I've messed up, and I need to apologize for disappearing and causing all that trouble." Eleanor remained silent, her gaze piercing. "Why now?" "Because I'm trying to get better," Howie said, his voice trembling. "I'm trying to fix what I can. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry." Eleanor's skepticism softened slightly, though she still looked guarded. "You're not here for money." "No, Eleanor, I swear," Howie said earnestly. "I just want to make things right." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension thick between them. Finally, Eleanor sighed, her shoulders relaxing a bit. "All right, Howie. I accept your apology." Howie's eyes brightened. "Thank you, Eleanor." Eleanor nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Take care of yourself, Howie." "You too, Eleanor," Howie replied, his relief palpable. On the drive home, Howie was uncharacteristically quiet at first, staring out the window as the landscape zipped by. Finally, he turned to Abner, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Neddie, I can't thank you enough for helping me with this," Howie said, his voice filled with gratitude. Abner glanced over, smiling. "I'm proud of you, Howie. That took a lot of courage." "Yeah, well, I couldn't have done it without you," Howie said. "You're like my personal guardian angel or something." Abner chuckled. "I'm just your friend, Howie." "Friend, angel, same difference," Howie said with a wink. "Seriously, Neddie, this was a big deal for me. I feel like a weight's been lifted off my shoulders." "I'm glad to hear that, Howie," Abner said, his tone sincere. As they drove on, Howie continued to thank Abner in his unique way, recounting their day and joking about how he'd expected Eleanor to throw him out on his ear. Abner listened, feeling a sense of relief that Howie had faced one of his biggest fears and come out stronger for it. Later that evening, Abner sat in his study, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the papers scattered across his desk. He leaned back in his chair, staring at a framed photo of his family on the wall. The events of the past few days played over and over in his mind. Helping Howie make amends to Eleanor had stirred something deep within him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He sighed and rubbed his temples, trying to process the flood of emotions. There was a knock on the door, and Howie peeked his head in. "Neddie, you busy?" "No, come on in, Howie," Abner replied, motioning for him to sit down. Howie plopped into the chair across from Abner, his usual energy subdued. "What's on your mind, Neddie? You look like you've been chewing on a tough piece of gristle." Abner chuckled softly. "Just thinking, Howie. A lot's happened recently." "Yeah, no kidding. Our trip to see Miss Eleanor was a real doozy," Howie said, leaning back and stretching his arms. Abner nodded. "It was. And it got me thinking about my own recovery, my own fears." Howie tilted his head, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Abner took a deep breath. "I've spent a lot of time worrying that I might relapse, that I'd go back to gambling. It's been a constant shadow over me. But helping you with your recovery, it's shifted something in me." "How so?" Howie asked, his brow furrowed. Abner leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "When I focused on helping you, I wasn't thinking about myself or my fears. I was focused on you, on supporting you. It made me realize that I've been too inwardly focused. Helping you has made me less fearful of the possibility of relapsing." Howie's eyes widened. "Wow, Neddie. I never thought I'd hear you say that. So, helping me's been like a kind of therapy for you?" Abner smiled. "In a way, yes, it's given me a different perspective. I'm grateful for it, Howie. Grateful that I've had this opportunity to help you." Howie looked down, fiddling with the edge of his shirt. "I'm glad to hear that, Neddie. You've been a rock for me, you know that. I don't know where I'd be without you." Abner reached across the desk, placing a hand on Howie's shoulder. "We're in this together, Howie. We help each other." They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating their shared experiences. Howie finally broke the silence, his usual playful demeanor returning. "Hey, Neddie, you remember that time we tried to build a treehouse for Molly and Davy, and ended up with nothing but a pile of wood and a broken hammer?" Abner laughed, the memory flooding back. "How could I forget? We were terrible at building anything." "Yeah, but it was fun, wasn't it?" Howie said, a nostalgic smile on his face. "It was," Abner agreed. "Simpler times." Howie's smile faded slightly. "You think we'll ever get back to that? The simplicity, I mean." Abner leaned back, considering the question. "Maybe not in the same way. But we can find new ways to enjoy life, new ways to be content." Howie nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess you're right. We've got to make the best of what we've got now." Abner studied Howie for a moment, seeing the changes in his friend. Despite his carefree nature, there was a depth to Howie that he hadn't noticed before, a resilience that had carried him through so much. "Howie, I want you to know that you're stronger than you think," Abner said softly. "You've come a long way." Howie looked up, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks, Neddie. That means a lot coming from you." They sat in companionable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. Abner felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling that had eluded him for so long. Helping Howie had not only aided his friend, but it also brought Abner a sense of clarity and purpose. Finally, Howie stood up, stretching. "Well, I better hit the hay, big day tomorrow." Abner nodded. "Good night, Howie." "Night, Neddie," Howie replied, giving a mock salute before heading out of the study. Abner watched him go, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He turned back to his desk, picking up a pen and starting to jot down his thoughts. As he wrote, the house around him grew quiet, the only sound the soft scratch of pen on paper. The fears that had once loomed so large seemed smaller now, less daunting. It had only been a week since Howie had moved into Abner's home, but he was beginning to feel self-conscious about not having a job. Every morning, he watched Abner leave for work and Phyllis take the kids off to school or manage her other responsibilities around the house. Howie's feelings of inadequacy grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, after the others had left for the day, Howie found himself alone in the house, feeling sorry for himself. He turned on the radio and sang along to some of the songs, but it did little to lift his spirits. He wandered into the kitchen, grabbed the newspaper Abner had left on the breakfast table, and started reading the funny pages. They provided a brief distraction, but soon he grew bored and began flipping through the rest of the paper. An advertisement in large, bold print caught his eye. Wanted, bus drivers, training provided. His heart raced with excitement. He quickly picked up the phone and dialed Abner's office number. When Abner answered, Howie's words came out in a jumble. "Neddie, you gotta hear this. I saw this ad in the paper about needing bus drivers and they provide training, and I love driving and I think I'd be great at it." "Whoa, slow down, Howie," Abner interrupted gently. "What's this about bus drivers?" Howie took a deep breath and explained about the newspaper ad. "I think I'd be perfect for it, Neddie. I love driving, and I'm a real people person. What do you think?" Abner paused, considering. "Well, Howie, if it's something you're passionate about, I say go for it. It sounds like a good opportunity." "Thanks, Neddie. I'm going to head to the bus depot right now and apply," Howie said, his excitement palpable through the phone. Howie arrived at the bus depot, a bundle of nervous energy. The office was bustling with activity, and it was clear that they were in dire need of drivers. Howie approached the counter and introduced himself, explaining that he was there about the ad in the newspaper. The woman behind the counter, looking somewhat harried, glanced up at him. "You're here for the bus driver position?" "Yes, ma'am. Howie Packer at your service," he said with a broad grin. "Perfect timing. We're short on drivers. Can you start training tomorrow?" she asked, barely glancing at his application before setting it aside. Howie's eyes widened. "Absolutely, I can start any time." She handed him a packet of information and a uniform. "Great. Be here at 7 a.m. sharp. Training begins then." Howie carefully carried the uniform back home, filled with pride. When Abner returned from work that evening, Howie was waiting eagerly to show him the uniform. "Neddie, look, they're starting my training tomorrow," Howie exclaimed, holding up the uniform. Abner smiled, seeing the pride and excitement in Howie's eyes. "That's great, Howie. I'm proud of you." Howie beamed. "Thanks, Neddie. I feel like I'm finally doing something right." The next morning, Howie was up before dawn, nervously adjusting his new uniform in front of the mirror. He wanted everything to be perfect for his first day of training. He hurriedly ate breakfast and left the house with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. At the bus depot, the training session began with a group of new recruits, each looking as anxious as Howie felt. The instructor, a gruff but friendly man, greeted them and began explaining the basics of bus driving. "Howie, right," the instructor said, glancing at his roster. "Yes, sir," Howie replied, standing a little straighter. "Good. You'll be starting on Route 12. It's a busy one, lots of people. Think you can handle it?" Howie nodded eagerly. "Absolutely, sir. I love driving and I love people." The instructor raised an eyebrow but smiled. "We'll see about that. Let's get started." The day flew by in a blur of instructions, practice runs, and learning the intricacies of handling a bus. Howie soaked it all up, his enthusiasm and natural knack for driving evident. By the end of the day, the instructor seemed impressed. "You've got a good feel for it, Howie. Keep it up and you'll be driving your own route in no time," the instructor said, clapping Howie on the shoulder. Howie returned home that evening, exhausted but exhilarated. He couldn't wait to tell Abner and Phyllis about his first day. When Abner walked through the door, Howie practically bounced over to him. "Neddie, you wouldn't believe how amazing today was. My instructor said I've got a good feel for driving the bus." "Can you believe it?" Howie exclaimed, barely able to contain his excitement. Abner smiled, feeling a swell of pride for his friend. "That's fantastic, Howie. I knew you'd do well." Phyllis joined them, smiling warmly at Howie. "We're proud of you, Howie. It sounds like you had a great first day." Howie beamed. "I did. And I'm just getting started. Tomorrow's another big day." As the evening wore on, Abner watched Howie animatedly recounting his day. The sense of purpose and pride in Howie's eyes was something Abner hadn't seen in a long time. The following evening, Abner sat at his desk, flipping through the pages of a worn-out ledger. The numbers danced before his eyes, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "Neddie, you got a minute?" Howie's voice broke through his thoughts. Abner looked up to see Howie standing in the doorway, a puzzled expression on his face. "Sure, Howie, come on in." Howie stepped into the study, wringing his hands. "You won't believe who I ran into today. Miss Eleanor's brother, Sam. He's still gambling, but he said he's interested in recovery." Abner frowned. "Sam, that's unexpected. Did he say why he wants to stop gambling?" "He didn't say much, just that he's had a run of bad luck," Howie replied, scratching his head. "He wants to come to a meeting with us." Abner's eyes narrowed. "I hope he's serious about it. We'll see tonight." That evening, Abner and Howie took Sam to their regular meeting. Sam looked out of place, his eyes darting around the room. As the meeting progressed, each member shared their stories, and it was clear they all knew the struggle well. Late in the meeting, the chairperson turned to Sam. "Would you like to share?" Sam shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I've been to meetings before back home. I've had a run of bad luck, but I'm in control. I could quit any time I want. I'm not like you all." The room fell silent, the other members exchanging knowing glances. Abner and Howie watched, their concern growing. Sam's denial was palpable, but no one criticized him or tried to force him to see the truth. After the meeting, Abner pulled Howie aside. "Sam's not ready, Howie. He's in deep denial." Howie sighed. "I know, Neddie, but maybe we can still help him." The next day, Howie finished his bus route, feeling a sense of accomplishment. As he stepped off the bus, he was surprised to see Sam waiting for him. "Sam, what are you doing here?" Howie asked, his surprise evident. "Hey, Howie, I thought I'd catch up with you. You mentioned your route last night, remember?" Sam said, his voice smooth. Howie frowned, trying to recall. "Did I? I must have forgotten." "Yeah, you did. Mind if I walk home with you?" Sam asked, flashing a smile. "Sure, Sammy, it's a fair walk, but I'd enjoy the company," Howie said, falling into step beside him. As they walked, Sam regaled Howie with stories of their past, making Howie feel at ease. But as they neared Abner's house, Sam looked at his watch and frowned. "I've lost track of time. I really need to get going," Sam said hurriedly. In truth, Sam did not want Abner to spot them together. He took a few steps away, then turned back. "Hey, Howie, can I ask you a favor? I've got some medical expenses and I'm short on cash." Howie hesitated, but Sam did look unwell. "How much do you need?" "Just a small loan. I promise I'll pay you back," Sam said, his eyes earnest. Howie pulled out his wallet and handed Sam more money than he could really afford. "Here you go. Don't worry about it." "Thanks, Howie, and please don't tell Abner. We wouldn't want to worry him," Sam said, turning to leave. Howie watched him go, suspicion gnawing at him but pushing it aside. "All right, Sam. Take care." Days passed without any word from Sam. Then, out of the blue, he appeared again at the end of Howie's bus route. "Sam, what are you doing here again?" Howie asked, more guarded this time. "I came to pay you back," Sam responded. Howie's eyes widened. "Really?" "Yeah, but I don't have cash on me. I won a bundle on a horse. If you come with me to the track, I can collect my winnings and pay you back," Sam explained. Howie hesitated, knowing the track was a dangerous place for a recovering compulsive gambler, but he also wanted to bring this matter to a conclusion. "All right, let's go." At the track, Sam cashed in his big winner and handed Howie the money he'd borrowed. "See, I told you I'd pay you back." "Thanks, Sam, I really ought to be going," Howie said, turning to leave. "Come on, Howie, let me buy you a drink to celebrate, for old time's sake," Sam insisted. Howie reluctantly agreed, and they sat down to watch the next race. As the horses left the gate, Howie's hands began to sweat. He ran his fingers over the bundle of cash in his pocket, the temptation almost overwhelming. Sam had already begun placing more bets. "Come on, Howie, one little bet won't hurt." Howie felt a sudden rush of fear. He knew he had to leave immediately. "I'm sorry, Sam, I have to go." Sam protested, but Howie didn't listen. He moved as fast as he could towards the exit, trying to empty his mind of the stimuli that threatened to overtake him. He went straight home on foot, barely able to remember the route he took to get back to Abner's house. The next morning, Howie was uncharacteristically quiet at the breakfast table. Abner noticed immediately, his brow furrowing with concern. "Howie, what's the matter?" Abner asked, setting his coffee cup down. Howie stared at his plate, poking at his scrambled eggs. "I feel guilty, Neddie." Abner's concern deepened. "Why's that?" Howie sighed heavily. "Just a few days ago, we had no secrets between us. You knew my whole story. But now, I think I might have gone and done something dumb that I can't tell you about." Abner leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Well, what could be so bad that you can't share it?" Howie hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. "It's not really my secret to share, Neddie. It's more complicated than that." They sat in silence for a while, the tension thick in the air. Finally, Howie took a deep breath and said, "I haven't come this far to be tripped up by keeping a dumb secret." He began to recount his encounter with Sam, the lie about needing money for medical expenses, and the trip to the racetrack. Abner listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to understanding. "Howie," Abner said slowly, "we should always be willing to lend a hand, but sometimes we need to recognize whether an individual actually wants to be helped." Howie nodded, the weight of his guilt lifting slightly. "I know, Neddie. I won't let this happen again." Following his near miss at the racetrack, Howie threw himself into his recovery with renewed vigor. Where once he had leaned heavily on Abner's greater experience, he now began to take more responsibility for his own recovery. He attended meetings regularly, engaged more actively, and even started offering support to newcomers. One morning, Howie brought up the subject of where he was going to live. "Neddie, I've been thinking. I can't stay here forever," he said, looking at Abner across the kitchen table. Abner was taken by surprise. "Howie, Phyllis, and I are in no hurry to get rid of you. We're happy having you here." "I know you are," Howie said with a smile. "You've been great, but sooner or later I have to stand on my own 2 feet." Abner felt a mix of pride and sadness. In some strange way, things were moving faster for Howie than they were for him. While he felt proud of Howie's growth, he also mourned the days of Howie's early recovery, similar to the way a parent feels proud of their maturing child, while simultaneously mourning the loss of the younger child they will never see again. "All right, Howie, we'll start looking for an apartment," Abner agreed, though his heart ached a little at the thought. The next evening, Abner returned home with a flyer advertising an apartment for rent across town. "This place seems perfect, Howie. It's affordable and looks to be in good shape." Howie took one look at the piece of paper and shook his head. "This is no good, Neddie." Perplexed, Abner asked, "Why not? What's wrong with it?" Howie grinned. "It's too far away from you and Phyllis and the kids." "I'm moving out. I'm not moving on." He picked up the newspaper left on the dining table since the morning. "This one. Yeah, it's not as new or pretty as the other one, but it's only a couple of blocks away from you guys, and that suits me just fine." That weekend, Abner's family helped Howie move. It didn't take long, as Howie didn't have many things to transport. All of his stuff fit into just one carload. Phyllis offered Howie some tips on how he might furnish the new place. "A few good pieces can make a world of difference, Howie," she said, smiling. David and Molly asked if they could visit. "Any time," Howie exclaimed, ruffling their hair playfully. Abner offered to help with any maintenance issues that might pop up. "If anything needs fixing, just let me know, Howie." As the small talk subsided, tears welled up in everyone's eyes. Howie pulled them all in for a group hug. "Now stop that crying," he said, his voice a mix of emotion and playfulness. "This is not goodbye, it's more like, howdy, neighbor." Howie watched with a beaming smile as Abner and his family made the very short drive home. David and Molly leaned out the window, smiling back and waving, calling out, "Howdy, neighbor." Some months had passed since Howie moved into his own place, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm for everyone. One morning, as the family gathered around the breakfast table, Phyllis brought up a question that had been on her mind for a while. "Abner, I've been asking you all year what this special day is that you have circled on our calendar. Normally you write a note of some kind." Abner glanced up from his newspaper, a twinkle of mystery in his eyes. "And all year I've informed you that, if we make it, I'll be able to let you know." Phyllis narrowed her eyes playfully. "What do you mean if we make it, Mr. Mystery Man? You do realize that date falls this week?" Abner looked genuinely surprised. Time had crept up on him. "It does?" David and Molly, always eager for any mystery, chimed in. "Come on, Dad. What's the big secret?" Abner folded his newspaper and set it aside. "It's no secret, really. It's just that, in the fellowship, we don't count our chickens before they hatch. We take things one day at a time." Phyllis, David, and Molly all looked even more puzzled than before. Finally, Abner sighed and decided to reveal the truth. "That day will be Uncle Howie's 1-year anniversary of giving up gambling. We're going to celebrate it at the meeting." Abner seemed relieved at the admission, both because he no longer had to brush off their questions and because it did indeed appear as if Howie was going to make it. A year earlier, he would not have been so confident. Abner's reflection was interrupted by Molly and David asking in unison, "Can we come to Uncle Howie's party, Dad?" Abner looked surprised. "Well, it's not exactly a party and we don't normally have kids at the meeting, but I know Howie would want you all there. I'll check with the group." The big night arrived. Even though Howie had his own car now, he decided he'd travel in Abner's car, just like they used to do when Howie first joined the fellowship. When Howie opened the front passenger door, he was surprised to see Phyllis and the kids in the back seat. "What are you guys doing here?" Howie asked, his eyes wide with surprise. "We're coming to the meeting," Molly answered in a matter-of-fact manner. "You look a little young to have a gambling problem, Missy," Howie said with a grin. "We're joining in to celebrate your 1-year milestone, Uncle Howie," exclaimed David. Tears welled up in Howie's eyes as he responded, "It's been the best year of my life, Davy." The meeting proceeded as usual. When Howie was invited to share, the chairperson presented him with a 1-year token. He proudly put it in his top pocket and buttoned it up straight away so it couldn't be lost. "Thanks, everyone. I don't have the words to say how much this means to me," Howie said, his voice thick with emotion. Abner was also invited to share. He had not gambled for more than 5 years and had been in the fellowship quite a bit longer than that. Yet this was the first time his family had heard him share his story, not only of gambling but the joys and strains of recovery as well. "When I first walked through those doors, I was a mess," Abner began, glancing at his family, who listened intently. "But this place gave me hope, and having people like Howie with me, it's been a blessing. Tonight we celebrate Howie's journey, and I'm so proud of him." The meeting continued with heartfelt shares and encouragement, the room filled with a palpable sense of community and support. After the meeting, the members stuck around to enjoy supper together. As Abner was serving supper to his family, he noticed that Phyllis was tearing up. He gave her a hug. "It's emotional, isn't it? Seeing how much Howie has changed this past year. You played a big part in that, Phyllis." Phyllis looked Abner in the eye, her voice soft but firm. "Howie's achievement is amazing, but actually it was your sharing that brought me to tears. Every week you head off to these meetings. Until now I had no idea what really goes on here. Tonight I heard for the first time, in your own words, exactly what it has taken to build this new life for all of us. I'm proud of you, Abner." Abner felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Phyllis. It means a lot to hear you say that." David and Molly bounded over, their faces full of excitement. "Can we have more of those cookies, Dad?" Abner chuckled, ruffling their hair. "Sure, kids, enjoy." Howie, standing nearby, watched the family interaction with a smile. "You've got a great family, Abner. Thanks for sharing them with me." Abner put an arm around Howie's shoulders. "You're part of this family too, Howie. We're in this together." The evening wound down with laughter and stories, the warmth of friendship and family. As Abner drove everyone home, he felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. After they had dropped Howie at his place, David and Molly leaned out the window, waving and calling out, "Howdy, neighbor." Howie laughed, waving back, "Howdy, kids. See you soon." Abner watched as Howie walked up to his door, the light inside turning on to welcome him home. 2 days after Howie's one-year recovery celebration, Abner and Howie found themselves driving to Danny's grave once again. The car ride was filled with quiet reflection, in the comfortable silence they shared. After parking the car, Abner and Howie made their way to Danny's grave, the sky overcast with a solemn gray. The path they walked was familiar, the air heavy with memories. Howie carried a small bouquet of flowers, while Abner brought a flask of coffee. They reached the grave and stood in silence for a moment, each lost in their thoughts. Howie took a deep breath, steadier than he had been during their first visit. "Hey, Danny," Howie began, his voice clear and calm. "It's me, Howie. A lot's happened since we last talked. I've made a lot of amends, got myself a job driving buses. Can you believe it? Me, driving buses and actually liking it. I even had a run-in with Sam, but you probably know how that went." Abner listened, his heart swelling with pride at Howie's composed demeanor. "I've got my own apartment now," Howie continued, placing the flowers gently on the grave. "It's not much, but it's mine. Got a car, too, and just celebrated my one-year anniversary of giving up gambling. Never thought I'd make it this far, Danny, and it's thanks to you and Abner." Howie glanced at Abner with a warm smile. Abner stepped forward, placing the flask of coffee on the grave. "Hey, Danny. It's been a year, and what a year it's been. I just wanted to thank you for getting us through it. There were times I didn't think we'd make it, but here we are." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "Work's been busy, but good. David and Molly are growing up so fast, and Phyllis is as strong as ever. I miss you, Danny, every day. Thank you for guiding us." Howie nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Abner and I were talking about that day we met in the hotel lobby a year ago. Funny how a chance meeting can change everything, huh?" Abner smiled, the memory vivid in his mind. "Yeah, it's strange how things work out. I remember seeing you there, thinking you were a ghost or a trick of my mind. But you were real." Abner took a long pause. "Howie, I've noticed that you haven't called me Neddie in a while." Howie looked off into the distance, considering the matter. "I guess that's because you've changed. You're no longer Neddie, my gambling buddy. You're Abner, a responsible father and husband, and a true friend." Abner looked at Howie with a smile. "You've changed too, Howie. You're not Harvey Pasteur, the gambler, anymore. You're Howie, a man who has turned his life around." The two men stood there in silence, the gravity of their shared journey dawning on them. They had both come so far, transformed by the trials and triumphs of the past year. As they prepared to leave, Abner turned back for some parting words with Danny. "Thank you, Danny, for everything. We couldn't have done it without you."